Well, Psalm 16 probably seems a bit of a strange passage to choose for Easter Sunday. But it's interesting, isn't it, that when the Apostle Peter wanted to preach the resurrection on the day of Pentecost, Psalm 16 is where he went. And also, when the great musician George Frederick Handel wanted to write a song about the resurrection for the Messiah, Psalm 16 is where he went too. That's interesting, isn't it? So we're going to follow in the footsteps of the great ones today and give it a go. Talk about Psalm 16 on Easter Sunday. Well, when I was younger, I thought that I was invincible. Anybody else have that problem? I used to ride my bike from Melbourne Uni to from Sandringham to Melbourne Uni and Melbourne Uni to Sandringham, back again in the evening, through bumper-to-bumper peak hour traffic, with no thought that there might be any danger there. I also used to drive my car through pea-soup fog. You couldn't see more than 5 metres ahead at 100 kilometres an hour on country roads. So, what could possibly go wrong? I had, for some reason, no understanding of my fragile mortality. Road toll statistics, they were just numbers, and I enjoyed counting numbers. Never happened to me. Maybe it came from my childhood, where my dad would take us unrestrained, sitting in the back of the trailer with the trailer hitched up to the car, and we would chant as we went along, "We want faster, we want faster." Now I'm older, safety matters. Sharita would still like me to go slower around the bends when I'm driving, but compared to my youthful self, I am now positively pedestrian. But the world that we live in has become very concerned about safety. You know, they've taken out the big swings that I used to play on when I was a child in the parks, and they've put little ones back that you can hardly make swing at all. In England, they've taken the pins out of the poppies for Remembrance Day so that people can't prick themselves by mistake. The folks who come and work for older people in their homes, help them with their housework, they're not allowed to move the furniture anymore, so they can't hurt their back. So I've spoken to people who are over 90 who move the lounge chairs in their homes so that the home help can vacuum underneath, because otherwise it wouldn't get done. It's possible that we might have gone a little bit over the top about safety. Well, David wrote Psalm 16 about 1,000 years before Jesus was born. And unlike us in our very safety-oriented world, he lived in a world where safety could not be guaranteed. You know, when he was shepherding his family's flock of sheep, he had confrontations with a lion and a bear. That doesn't sound very safe, does it? And when he was king of Israel, the nation went to fight out in a war, and you don't do what kings and prime ministers do these days. They send off the army to sort it out. No, David had to personally lead the troops in battle. Mostly, there was an occasion where he didn't and stayed home, and he got rebuked for that, but it was the king's job to lead the troops into battle. Being a king was not a safe occupation. Well, the first verse of Psalm 16 is a plea for safety. It says, "Keep me safe, my God, for in you I take refuge." Like people in our super safety conscious society today, David wanted to be safe. But unlike people today, or many of them, he saw that true safety comes from being in right relationship with God. True safety comes from being in right relationship with God. So this is how he expresses it in verse 2. "I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you, I have no good thing." The good things that he wants to have are safety and refuge and security. You can tell that from the verses around. We might think of good things as being things like houses and holidays and things like that. David lived in a world where death often came suddenly, and the blessings that he was looking for were safety and security, refuge. So in verse 5, "Lord, you're my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure." Safety is what he's after, and he realises that safety comes from right relationship with God. And we see that his view of safety is not for this life alone. He wants God to keep him safe on the other side of death. He trusts that God will keep him safe on the other side of death. And that's where the last 3 verses of Psalm 16 go. Let me read them again for you. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. You've made known to me the path of life. You'll fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. There's no doubt that David trusts God for safety, and his trust extends beyond the grave. If you really want to be safe, you need something to keep you safe beyond the grave. It's the only one thing that's a certainty for every person in history. They all died. No one has cheated the grave. Taking the pin out of Remembrance Day poppies is ultimately a futile gesture. You can stop people pricking themselves, but you can't stop them from dying. We will all die one day. Life insurance cannot change that fact. Modern medicine cannot change that fact. So if safety is to be any real use, it must stretch beyond the grave. And that's where David's hope is. He expresses it in the words in verse 10, and Handel picks that up in the resurrection song in the Messiah. You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. David believed in a God who could raise the dead. Well, fast forward 1,000 years from David writing that psalm, and you've got the Apostle Peter on the day of Pentecost, and he's preaching to the crowd about the resurrection of Jesus. And this is what he says, that Elizabeth read to us. But God raised Jesus from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. David said about him, this is Psalm 16, I saw the Lord always before me, because he's at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest in hope, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. You've made known to me the paths of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence. And then Peter went on, fellow Israelites, I can tell you confidently that the patriarch David died and was buried. His tomb is here to this day. But he was a prophet, and he knew that God had promised him on oath that he would place one of his descendants on his throne. And so, seeing what was to come, he spoke of the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to the grave, nor did his body see decay. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it. The Apostle Peter reads the psalm that David had written, and he reads it about the resurrection of Jesus. David's tomb's here in Jerusalem, he says. This psalm must be pointing forward to great David's even greater descendant. Does that mean that David was mistaken to put his trust in God, not to abandon him to the grave? No, not at all. The resurrection of Jesus is in fact the guarantee that David's hope is not misplaced. How do we know that God will raise David? How do we know that God will fill David with joy in his presence? The resurrection of Jesus is the first fruits. God has demonstrated his power over sin and death, and what God has done for his only Son, he will do for all his children. For all whose faith is in Jesus Christ, God will raise them the same way that he raised Jesus. David spoke more than he knew. He spoke as a prophet, someone who from a deep faith in God and someone who from a sure knowledge of God's character can see the way that God will work, even if he can't have possibly known all of the details. And in God's providence, David expressed himself in a way that pointed perfectly to Jesus. As Peter put it on the day of Pentecost, seeing what was to come, David spoke of the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to the realm of the dead, nor did his body see decay. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it. Well, if the resurrection of Jesus was just about Jesus, that would be great news for Jesus. Peter says it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him, and that's right. Death has a hold on us because of sin. Jesus lived a perfect life, a life without sin, and so death had no hold on him. Well, that's something to be celebrated, something to be admired. But if it's just about Jesus, it's no help to me. But the resurrection of Jesus is not just about Jesus. When we become his followers, we have the benefits of his perfect life given to us. It's a bit like, suppose you had a friend who was a member of the MCG and they let you use their membership so that you could go to the grand final. Well, it'll be like that, except even better. The I Lived a Perfect Life Club has only one member. But Jesus lets all his friends use his membership for eternity. In fact, it's even better than that. Jesus makes all his friends perfect. So they are rightly members of the I Lived a Perfect Life Club, even if our lives are far from perfect. And so Jesus' resurrection is the guarantee of our resurrection. Well, that's life-changing news. It gives urgency to our task of bearing witness to Jesus' resurrection. Jesus' resurrection is not just a special thing that happened, it's a special thing that happened that people today can be part of. Or they can miss the opportunity. Aren't you eager for your family and friends to participate in Jesus' resurrection? Like the Apostle Peter on the day of Pentecost, we've got an urgent task of bearing witness to Jesus' resurrection. Why do you think Peter was telling the crowds about Jesus' resurrection? Jesus had gone back up to heaven by then. It was after his ascension to heaven, Peter was talking to the crowds. They were never going to see Jesus in the flesh. Why do they need to know about his resurrection? Well, because at his resurrection, Jesus was declared to be Lord. He's to be worshipped. A church will be gathered that participates in his resurrection. And Peter was preaching to the crowd to gather that church. Like Peter, we can't force people to respond to the resurrection of Jesus. It's up to God to work in their hearts, to draw people to himself. But we can get the news out. Tell people about the resurrection of Jesus and what it means. Give them an opportunity to respond. At Holy Trinity, we're here to make disciples of Jesus. So as well as proclaiming his resurrection at our public services, like we're doing right now, we also proclaim his resurrection in small groups and in our youth group and at our play group and at Trinity Tucker. Run courses like Christianity Explored, proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus actually controls everything we do. Well, in a minute or two, we're going to listen to Handel's Messiah proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus. And when we do that, it's not because we prefer classical music, because we're very cultured people here at Holy Trinity. No, we're utterly flexible about the style of music we listen to. I saw a rewrite of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, which was proclaiming the Christmas story this week, and if I still remember by Christmas, I'm going to bring it out. I don't care if it's Handel or Queen. The question is, does it bear witness to Jesus? That's the question. The resurrection of Jesus gives us the urgent task of bearing witness to the good news. Well, the resurrection of Jesus also gives us confidence in our faith. When we read those words from Psalm 16, "You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your Holy One see decay," we don't just read those as a statement of David's faith, nor do we just read them as a statement of prophecy about Jesus. We properly read that psalm as about ourselves. The Lord God will not abandon me to the grave. If you're a Christian person, he will not abandon you to the grave. When we read in the psalm, "Keep me safe, O God, for in you I take refuge," we know that yes, God will keep us safe. Not just safe now, safe for eternity. The safety stretches beyond the grave. This is not take the pin out of the Remembrance Day poppy safety. This is fair dinkum enduring safety. Safety that will overcome whatever life throws at us. Safety that in the end will overcome death. That's the resurrection confidence that Jesus gives us. Well, I'll give you 2 minutes and 41 seconds to reflect on that resurrection confidence as we listen to Handel's Messiah's resurrection aria.